Hello, and welcome to Public Health Live, the third Thursday breakfast broadcast. I'm Rachel Breidster, and I'll be your moderator today. Before we get started, I would like to ask that you please fill out your online evaluations at the close of today's program. Continuing education credits are available after you complete our short post-test, and your feedback is helpful to us in the development of future programs. We encourage you to let us know what topics are of interest to you and how we can best meet your needs. As for today's program, we will be taking your questions throughout the hour. You can call us on our toll-free number at 1-800-452-0662, or you can send written questions by fax to 518-426-0696. We can also accept questions by email at phlive.ny@gmail.com. Today's program is Sodium Savvy, Salient Public Health Solutions. Our guests are Julie Tucker, a registered dietitian from the Broome, Tioga BOCES Food Services, and June Schuldt, a public health nurse from Schenectady County Public Health Services. Thank you both so much for being here. We're very excited to have you.
Thank you.
Now, before we talk with our two guests, we're going to hear from Amy Jositis from the Division of Chronic Disease Prevention at the New York State Department of Health about sodium consumption and sodium reduction efforts.
Sodium has gotten to be a large problem in this country because it's been increasing in the food supply. And sodium is related to hypertension. Excess sodium can increase your risk of hypertension. And hypertension increases your risk of having a heart attack or a stroke. The average American eats 3,300 milligrams a day, which is huge. The recommendation is 1,500 milligrams for people who are 51 or over, African Americans, people with heart disease, diabetes, and chronic kidney failure. So you can see that most people, that's 60% of the population, should be eating only 1,500 milligrams. So 90% of people are eating more than they should. The recommendation for people who are well or under 51 is 2,300 milligrams per day. People often think when they're told to follow a low sodium diet that, oh, I'll just stop using the salt shaker. But most people don't get their majority of their salt from the salt shaker. The sodium mostly comes from processed food and restaurant foods. Over 80% of the salt in our diets, or sodium in our diets, comes from those kinds of foods. So even if you stopped using the salt shaker altogether at home, you'd still be consuming too much sodium. The top contributors to sodium in the diet are bread and rolls, pizza, cold cuts, poultry, mixed dishes, soups, salty snacks, cheese, cold cuts, and cured meats. Public health has an important role in sodium reduction. We need to alert people to the limit because most people don't know what the recommendations are. We've heard a lot of people say, my doctor told me to low sodium, but they have no idea what that means. The other role is to increase demand for those foods. So if people aren't demanding it, the food industry can't respond. You know, the food industry can respond very quickly to things. When gluten-free was all the rage, or is all the rage now, suddenly we see a bazillion gluten-free products. So if people start saying, I want low sodium, the industry will respond. So that's another piece. And the third piece is really to help food professionals, like cooking professionals in the food service area, figure out how to do this. We've been making some headway, and you'll hear from my colleagues a little bit later about how they did that exactly. Reduce sodium in the food supply, it can't be a dramatic cut. People say, let's bring it back to what it was 20 years ago. And we need to get there, but if we do it all at once in a big chunk, people will notice the taste and think it tastes bad. So we have to, as over the years sodium increased slowly, we need to decrease it slowly so people's palates have time to adjust.
So it was really great to hear from Amy to set a context for what we're going to be talking about today. And I know you, Julie, have a lot of really interesting things to share with us. So why don't you start by just setting the stage for what you're going to be talking about today?
Well, today I'm going to be talking about lowering sodium in school meals through the Broome County Sodium and Reduction Schools Project.
Excellent. And for those of us who don't know, can you start by just giving us some demographics about Broome County?
Sure. Broome County is about 195,000 people with a mean household income of about $41,000, and we have about 13.8% individuals living below the poverty level, and 23% of children living below the poverty level. We also have about 91% white and 3.3% African American.
Interesting. And do you have any data or any demographics about health conditions related to sodium consumption in Broome County?
About 31% of adults have hypertension, and we have significant racial health disparities in Broome County, as well as high premature death rates from all cardiovascular diseases. So this was really a great county for us to work in.
Absolutely, it sounds like it. So given the health conditions related to sodium consumption, tell us about some of the projects that Broome or Broome Tioga counties have taken on to try to address these issues.
Well, Broome County has worked in a couple sectors, including the grocery stores and the senior meal nutrition sites. But today we're specifically going to talk about elementary schools and our goal to reduce sodium in school meals.
And how large of a project is this?
This project is a 3-year grant. We're currently in our 3rd year. It's funded by the Centers for Disease Control, and we're one of 5 funded communities. And again, like I said, we're coordinated by the New York State Department of Health.
And are there other communities that are participating in similar or the same kind of program that you're doing in Broome County?
So across the United States, there's 5 communities, 2 in California, 1 in Kansas, and 2 in New York. 1 is in New York City, and the other one is the one we're talking about today, which is Broome and Schenectady counties.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the food itself. What are some of the more common items that we should be on the lookout for, or things that tend to have higher sodium content that maybe we wouldn't even expect have a higher sodium content?
Yeah. A lot of the food that we eat every single day is pretty high in sodium, and this is what we did when we started this project. We looked at foods that tend to be high in sodium, including the top sources, which is bread, which a lot of times surprises people, and the bread has a lot of sodium. But bread, we have cold cuts, pizza, poultry, soup, sandwiches, cheese, pasta dishes, meat dishes, and snacks. And again, these are a lot of the foods that people consume every single day. And specifically for the schools, we looked at some of the items, off of this list that had a lot of sodium in them. One of the top items, we have a chicken speedy sub, which is actually local to Binghamton, New York, which is where I'm from. So again, over 1,000 milligrams of sodium was really high, and we've been looking at these items. Sandwiches like ham and cheese, turkey and cheese. Again, you have your cold cuts and bread, and those tend to be high in sodium. Grilled cheese, tuna, and peanut butter and jelly, again, it's a little bit lower. And another important part of a meal that plays into the sodium role is the condiments. When you look at condiments tend to be really high in sodium, and those are usually in addition to something that you're already eating.
So once you've identified all of these foods, certainly you list off all those foods that we all eat, and certainly children in elementary schools are eating those sorts of foods as well. Who do you have to get involved in the process if you want to start changing what foods are available and what foods the children are eating?
Well, we had several key stakeholders that were involved in this project. And first, starting with the schools, we looked at getting the administrators and the school boards, as well as the food service, involved, including the directors, the managers, and the staff. Also, parents and students play an important role in this, and conveying to them that health is important. Teachers and the school staff as well, because they all play a role in that school component of this project. We also had food service industry. We worked closely with our vendors, manufacturers, brokers, because again, we're getting products from them, and they need to understand that this is important and health is important to students in our schools. We had the Sodium and Reduction and Communities partners, including our leadership team in Broome County and the consortium, were both played key roles in this project. And the public health sector, we had the Centers for Disease Control and the National Sodium Reduction Initiative.
So lots and lots of people involved in the process to really start making these changes.
Absolutely.
Now, when you look at Broome Tioga Food Services, how many people are they actually serving? What does that population size look like?
Well, we cover 15 school districts that are rural, suburban, and urban areas. And 12 of these school districts are in Broome County, and 3 of them are in Tioga County. We're about 45 elementary schools, ranging from 640 to 6,000 students. So it's really a wide variety. We serve approximately about 20,000 lunches and 8,000 breakfasts every single day. And our school district's free and reduced runs anywhere from 17% to 20%. So as you can see, we have quite a variety of schools across the southern tier.
Yeah, certainly. It sounds like it. Now, what does staffing look like? You've got a pretty diverse, sizes of the schools and lots of, 20,000 lunches, give or take. That's a pretty big number. So what's the staff size to make all of this happen?
Well, we have 1 senior food service director, and then we also have 2 food service directors that oversee several districts. We also have a special projects coordinator that works on other projects, the sodium reduction one and other projects like Farm to School. And then I am also on staff as the registered dietitian. And then at our schools, we have 15 managers that oversee their sites who do a really great job at their schools. and we also have about 400 food service staff at all the districts combined.
Okay, so you start by identifying what are the foods, and then you get your stakeholders involved, and we've got an idea of who you're actually serving and how many hands are going into this process. So what approaches did Broome start with? I mean, how did you really get things moving once you started identifying who needed to be the key players?
Well, we already have a program in place called the Rock On Cafe, and there's a lot of different components that play into this program, including consolidated menus and bids, as well as nutrition education that we feel is very important, recipe development and promotions, and most importantly, community involvement, because we look at this program as a preventative program, and all of these go into the 15 school districts so that we're able to produce school meals that are healthy and nutritious, and we have a preventative program for students.
And so it certainly seems like it's a multifaceted program, and that's terrific. So you mentioned earlier that this is a 3-year program. So can you start with, what did year 1 look like for you guys when you first started out?
Well, in year 1, we had to figure out where to start, and first we started looking at the foods that we had on the menus, and we did this through, we have management meetings that we come together and we discuss this. We also had recipe group meetings, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later. We're able to look at food items and test them, and also do test tastes with students. So in addition to that, we hosted our own food show to kind of bring in vendors and tell them this is what we're looking for. We're looking for lower sodium items that also meet other nutrition criteria. And so we hosted that, and in addition we went out and actually looked at food shows to find products that we want to be able to reduce sodium in the school meals.
So you certainly kept busy.
Yeah. and this is a continuous process. This goes throughout the entire 3-year grant and will hopefully be sustainable after that. That's our ultimate goal.
Excellent. And what would you say are some of the key elements that you identified?
Yep. So some of the key elements and I'm going to talk about each one of these individually, is a nutrition baseline. Where did we start? Where are we going? The procurement system, what we kind of specified in our bids. Vendor shows, menu planning and recipe development, which are integral into this process, taste testing with students, and in-services for staff.
So the first thing you identified there was establishing the nutrition baseline, and you used a particular type of nutrition software to help you with that. Is that correct?
Correct. The nutrition software that I used was NutriKids, and this is used all around the country. And what we did was we looked at the baseline where we were on the menus, and through the system we're able to enter ingredients and create recipes that can be entered into a monthly menu, so that I'm able to do an analysis, and this analysis is based on projections of what we think students will take based on production records, so it's fairly accurate, and then we can get the average monthly sodium content over the month, and we can also break down and look at what meals are higher, what meals are lower, and that way we can target what we want to look at.
And so once you had that data available to you, what did some of the benchmarks or goals look like over the course of the project?
When we started this project, we were about at 1,420 milligrams, which is quite high for a meal. But then we started reducing over a year, and our first goal was to meet 1,200 milligrams of sodium, and then eventually 1,000 milligrams of sodium or less this year. And we're actually in our year 3, like I said, and we're really close to meeting that goal. So we're pretty excited about that.
Yeah, that sounds excellent. Now, can you give us a breakdown for the audience of what a typical nutrition analysis looks like, so that we can kind of visualize how that data comes to light?
So when I use NutriKids, I plug in all the main menu items for that day, as well as all the sides, the condiments, and the milk, because they all have sodium in them. So when you're looking at a nutrition analysis, I try to break down the amount that I think will take, say for pizza compared to a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. If according to our production records, more kids take pizza, then I'm going to weight that higher than a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, so that we get a more accurate nutrition analysis when we do this project.
And what were some of the key strategies then? Once you know these are our higher sodium foods, or these are what kids are tending to consume more, what strategies did you take to try to adjust the menu items?
We use several strategies to try to reduce sodium, because as you know, it's very challenging. And one of the first ones we use is reformulation. And we went to companies and we worked with them, and they were able to reformulate some of the items that we have. For example, one of our individual round pizzas, the company reformulated and it's lower in sodium, and we of course did test tasting. It was acceptable. Another key strategy that we use is substitution. For example, grilled cheese sandwich, we're able to substitute in a lower sodium cheese, and that cut the sodium down significantly from over 1,100 milligrams to a little bit less than 700. The other strategy that we used was to reduce portion size. For example, tomato soup, we cut the portion size of that down as we're not counting it as anything, so we're able to do that and reduce sodium in the meals. Another thing is to offer more fresh or frozen produce that tends to be, which is lower in sodium. That was another strategy we used. And lastly, to remove some items from the menu. For example, we had a ham and cheese on a pretzel roll, and the roll was higher in sodium, so those are some items that we ended up taking off the menu.
Interesting. Now, if you actually wanted to replace an item, take one thing off and bring something new in, what does that process look like?
Well, we would do test tasting, and then we would be able to reach out to vendors and say, we're looking for something a little bit different. One of the things we do on our bids is we specify the nutrition that we want. So with this grant, we're able to specify we want lower sodium items, and we're going to give preference to it if that's what we're asking for. So we can write it right into our bid process. And when we send this out, they can see that that's what we're bidding.
And how do you even find out about what potential foods are available?
Well, we have looked all over. We go to a lot of food vendor shows, but one of the things we actually did was we hosted our own. We sent letters out to certain vendors and we said, this is what we're looking for. We want items that are lower in sodium to meet. We actually sent out an amount that we wanted and also met other nutrition guidelines, because even though we're just focused on sodium, we want them to also be healthy all around. And so we had these shows, we invited in our staff and the health department and different people wanted to be there so that we could look at these items and get feedback to be able to make changes.
Now, you've talked a lot about the different nutritional aspects, and certainly you've taken a broad look at the picture of how do you adjust the menu working within those nutritional constraints. But when we're talking about a school budget, I imagine there's also financial considerations that go into this as well. So can you talk to us about that part of the process?
Absolutely. School lunch, we run a really fine line on a budget.
I bet.
And when we look at the school lunch meal costs, there's a breakdown that we try to stick to. When you look at the main component on a tray, the bread in the entree, the bread should be about 11 cents. The entree should be about 57. Milk is about 20 cents. Fruit and vegetables about 20 cents each. But when you look at sometimes fresh is a little bit more, is actually a lot more expensive. And then also the utensils, and all those play into the cost of a meal. And what students pay, or if they're free and reduced, the reimbursement rates we get have to cover not only the food costs, but labor and benefits and supplies. So there's a lot that goes into a meal, and we're always looking at costs to make sure that it fits into the plan.
And so once you've identified things that perhaps you can afford to do, how does that menu planning or how does the recipe development take place?
Well, we have a menu group that has managers and directors, and our current focus right now is on lower sodium items, dark green and orange vegetables, and legumes and whole grains. And what we do is we come in about once a month and we test new items and we look for new recipes. And once we find something that we like, we'll go out and we'll test it with students to get feedback, because they're the ones that are eating it. And we want to make sure not only that we're serving it, but that they're consuming it, because that way they're getting the nutrients that they need.
It certainly sounds, when you and I first spoke, it was like, what a thorough process that you went through. And so I'm really glad that you have the opportunity to share that with the audience. We also had the opportunity to go to the Johnson City schools to talk with health department employees and see the process in action. So let's take a look now at some of what we were able to see.
Hi, I'm Marissa Lampfair from the Broome County Health Department. I'm a public health representative, and I'm working on the Sodium Reduction in Communities project. Today I'm here with the recipe group that is comprised of the registered dietitian, school food service managers and directors that represent the 15 school districts that are part of Broome, Tioga, BOCES. This group meets monthly, and they're trying these new products. After they feel a product is acceptable, they will taste test it then with students and then add it to the school lunch menu. Throughout the course of this project, we found that a center of the plate item, which is the protein or a bread, the main part of the child's lunch meal, is the hardest item that has been hard to find acceptable low sodium versions and that are acceptable as far as taste and cost goes with the students. One of the biggest barriers that we've come up against is the cost when it comes to adding these new items that have been reformulated to the menu. If it's a center of the plate item, it really can only be maybe 1 or 2 cents more per meal to add it to the menu. The biggest thing that we need is for the industry to make the change. We are not able to do scratch cooking in all of our kitchens in the 15 districts that we serve. So the more low sodium items that we have that already are prepared, the better it's going to be to help us. When you take sodium out, we have to be careful that fat or other artificial ingredients are added to the foods. Additionally, with the Healthy Hunger-Free Kids Act, that has really helped us because sodium guidelines and standards are looked at. So we are seeing a boost from the manufacturers and vendors. When we do a taste testing with students, the students vote on the item, and typically with this population, it's usually all or nothing. So the kids usually either really like it or they don't approve it and we can't add it to the menu. We do not let them know that it is low sodium because we find that stealth health works best not only with kids but with all age groups. And from doing our research and working with this project, we found that if someone would know that an item is lower in sodium or deemed healthy, they really don't want to try it. At the end of the day, we can only do so much. We really need the help from the industry and the food manufacturers to reduce the sodium because we all need to have one goal in mind in improving our children's health. So please help us halt the salt.
So as I said, I really enjoyed talking to you about the program, and it was great for us to have the opportunity to actually go out and see the kids taste testing. And you know, I had the opportunity to do the taste testing as well, and it was a delicious recipe. But I know they can't all be winners. So can you talk to us about maybe a taste test that you did that you tried it, you did the best effort, but the kids weren't so impressed?
Yeah, well, one of our tastes that we did was with hummus, and actually the taste test went pretty well.
Excellent.
Overwhelmingly, the students loved it. But then when we actually put it on the menu, that's the true test of whether it's going to be successful or not. And it wasn't as successful as we thought. So again, we can just go back to the drawing board and retest recipes and retest them with students to make sure that they're going to be successful in the future.
Sounds like a very thorough process. I really enjoyed getting to go out there and see how it all works. Now, what do you do to make sure that you have buy-in from your administrators or your school staff? Do you take measures to ensure that they're supporting the process?
When we started this project, we wanted to reach out to the schools and let them know this is what we're doing. We wanted their support because without their support, it would not be successful. So we did in-service trainings with our staff and with the directors as well in all the school districts. But we also did in-services for the administrators at the schools because we want them to be on board with this process. If they're not understanding why we're making changes in the cafeteria to the school meals, then they won't be supportive, and we want that support so that we're able to make healthier meals for students.
And in doing that, in making healthier meals for students, what are some of the things that you've added to the menu? Because I know there have been a number of different changes that you've made over the course of this program.
We've done many taste tests, and we have made some changes to our menu, and we continue to do this, and we will even after this year. And some of the new items that we're using are a reduced fat, reduced sodium taco meat. We're also using reduced fat, reduced sodium cheeses in our sandwiches and grilled cheese. And this made a huge difference because, as I mentioned earlier, you know, sandwiches with the cold cuts and the cheese and the meat tend to be really high in sodium. So any amount that we can cut from those is really great. We also created some new items that were quite popular. The fruit and yogurt munchable, which has yogurt, fresh fruit, a whole grain bar in it, and a mozzarella cheese stick, which is also served with milk and a vegetable as well. And this was quite popular across all our districts. First, we did it as a side item, and we ended up making it a full entree, one of our main items, because students loved it. We also then branched out and we're doing a yogurt meal every single day now that students have the option to take, which is lower in sodium. And lastly, we do a fruit and yogurt parfait which again, this is a healthier option for students that they really love to eat.
And what about, did you add, I know you had talked about, you contacted your pizza vendors and talked about reducing their ingredients, their composition as well. Were you able to change the menu with a new pizza?
Yep, so we made some other changes as well. One of them was in the pizza products, and we are currently still working with our vendors and brokers, and they have been fabulous about getting us new products that are lower in sodium. And some of the other items besides pizza is we looked at spaghetti sauce, mixing some lower sodium with regular, because the lower sodium wasn't acceptable on its own. It was just very bland and not acceptable. So when you mix it, you can cut down the sodium and also make it acceptable to students. Another item that we looked at was our beef hamburger patties. And I can't believe how many we tested, but we wanted to make sure it was acceptable to students. And we did a bunch of taste tests with those. And we finally found one that's about 90 milligrams of sodium, which is really great. It's a lower item for students. And we also had another item, which is a roasted chicken. It's, of course, unbreaded and roasted and lower in sodium and has been acceptable to the students. And again, we rotate these on our menus. We try to mix up the menus and make them acceptable to students.
Well, considering all the limitations you have to work with, both financial and the nutritional aspect, it certainly seems like you've added quite a few things to the menu through the course of this project. What are some of the things that you've tried that either didn't pass your test or didn't pass the students' test and have not made it onto the menu?
Yeah, so we've had some items that are just not acceptable, and I think in any process you find that. And some of the items that we had were unbreaded chicken breasts. We've tried several of them, and we tried them with students. We put them on the menu, and they just haven't been acceptable. And we can tell this by looking at meal counts and production records of what students choose to take every single day. Another item that we had was a lower sodium tomato soup. Again, not acceptable to students quite yet. So with that, we actually cut down the portion size of the soup, as I had mentioned earlier. Another item that we found that was unacceptable was mac and cheese. We tested a bunch of mac and cheese recipes and products with students, and it just was not acceptable to them. So we haven't quite found one yet. And currently, we don't have mac and cheese on our menu that much. So, but still, we're looking for a product that tends to be a kid favorite. Some other items that we looked at, we had some lower sodium pizzas that were acceptable, but we also had some that were not. So we keep trying to taste those. Again, we're looking at items that are kids' favorites, and we're trying to make them more nutritious and healthier. Some other items we had were lower sodium spaghetti sauces. Again, lower sodium spaghetti sauce on its own did not taste good, but when we ended up mixing it, it was a lot better. And lastly, we had a product that was Asian chicken. It hasn't been quite acceptable. We sometimes put it on to mix up our menus, but overall, it's not really a popular item in our districts.
Okay. So some of it's dependent on, from district to district. Maybe other schools would have successes with things that your students didn't appeal to your students.
Absolutely. I mean, across our 15 districts, it's interesting because in some of the schools, the items go really well, and others they don't. So we try to come to a compromise when we're doing the menus.
Sure. So what would you say throughout this whole process, what have been some of the biggest barriers to you in trying to, expand the menu or change the menu and just make healthier options available?
I think one of our biggest barriers is cost, and I kind of mentioned this earlier when I talked about the amount that we spend on each component of the meal that we serve. But higher cost items, the lower sodium ones we have found tend to be higher in cost, which is certainly a barrier to us. For example, tomato soup, the regular, say a 6-ounce serving is about 12 cents. If we do a lower sodium 6-ounce serving, it's about 42 cents. So that is significantly higher. So when you mix it together, it could come to about 27 cents. But again, if it's not acceptable to students, it's not an item that we're going to serve.
Right.
Another example is a grilled cheese sandwich. We went to the lower sodium reduced fat cheese, and it went from 37 cents to 56 cents. This is a 51% increase in cost, and this is one of our largest barriers when we're trying to make changes to lower sodium in certain items. Another barrier we have is a lack of lower sodium products. But again, industry is working, very hard to come up with new products that we can use that taste good, that are nutritious. So I think over time that will get a little bit better, and we'll be able to find more products. Student acceptability, like I said, if it doesn't taste good, students aren't going to eat it, and then they're not getting the nutrition that they need. So That's another barrier we face. And lastly, naturally occurring sodium. I mean, there is sodium in a lot of naturally occurring products such as milk. Regular milk has about 125 milligrams for an 8-ounce serving. And, that plays into the overall sodium that students intake throughout the day.
So it certainly seems like when we look at how far your program has come, you've overcome quite a few barriers in making these changes. What sort of things do you have to consider to make sure that the changes you've made are going to be sustainable moving into the future?
Well, when we look at this whole project, absolutely we're looking for it to be sustainable over time. And some of the things we look at is the way that our system is organized. We're extremely fortunate that we had a program in place. Like I mentioned, the Rock On Cafe program, through Broome, Tioga, BOCES. We have this program in place, so we're just looking at making it more organized, which it already is, but being able to be flexible and adaptable to these changes. When we go in and we change items and change menus, we have to be flexible because, like I said, not everything works. So if we're doing that, we're able to make it more sustainable. And also our values that we have. Our program really has a value on health. We focus on this as a preventative program, and we have a commitment to providing more nutritious foods and higher quality foods to students. We also look at, through this, creating our standardized menus. If we have standardized menus and we don't always follow them, we try to change it up a little bit, as students tend to like that. But creating this, we're able to make changes and keep it consistent and reduce sodium over time. We're also very fortunate through the Rock On Cafe and Broome, Tioga, BOCES with this centralized resources that we have. We're able to do purchasing together, planning and analyzing. And we're able to, combine our power to get products that we want and specify what we want, as well as, analyze the menus for all the districts. And we're also able to engage the community through this program and keep it sustainable with our stakeholders. And like I said, overall, we're capitalizing on a program that's already there, creating change that is sustainable in our schools that we can keep over time.
So talk to us, with all of this work that you've done, give us an idea of just how much sodium has been reduced in the short 3 years. I mean, 3 years is a long time. You've gotten a lot of work done, but really when you look at how much work you've done, it's occurred in a pretty short time span. So give us an idea of what those numbers really look like.
Well, when we first got on board with this, we thought, wow, 3 years, it seems like a long time, but it really goes by pretty fast.
I bet.
And over the past 3 years, we've cut a ton of salt in our school meals. And,
like
we're
literally a ton of salt.
We've cut about 2,381 pounds in 2 years. So, and again, we're in our third year now, and we haven't done that calculation yet. But we're looking to continue this. And I think with the new school meal regulations that have come out and our initiatives through our program, we're able to continue this, keep it sustainable, and really just continue to lower sodium in school meals.
Really, really interesting and really progressive work that you're doing. I mean, I think it's terrific how comprehensive the program is. And if there's other school districts or other programs that are interested in finding out more about what you've got going on, is there a way that they can contact you for more information?
If anybody would like more information, they can reach me by email. It's jtucker@btboces.org. And feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to answer any questions or give out any information to help other districts around the country.
Thank you so much, Julie. I really think it's a lot of tremendously valuable information, so thank you.
Thank you.
And June, thank you. I know you've been sitting here the whole time, hopefully enjoying the conversation.
Yes, it's been wonderful to hear about.
You're working with Schenectady County, and I know you're working on a lot of sodium reduction initiatives as well, but a slightly different focus targeting the senior population and working more with restaurants or senior meals. So can you start by just giving us an idea of where those ideas came from, where those programs came from?
Well, in Schenectady County, we were looking at seniors because seniors are at high risk for high blood pressure. And in 2009, 59% of individuals over the age of 65 in New York State reported that they had high blood pressure. And as you heard from Amy in the beginning, this population should not consume over 1,500 milligrams of sodium a day. And that is really difficult when you're eating meals outside of the home. So we were trying to find out a way that we could make this a more achievable limit to keep for seniors while they were eating meals outside of the home. So we looked at two different venues. One was the senior meal programs that are out there that provide home delivered meals and congregate meals. And the other one, it would be addressing foods that are served in restaurants, such as cafes and diners where seniors would frequent.
And so when you started working with both the restaurants and senior meal programs, what were some of the goals that you set out with?
Okay, with our restaurants, we wanted to increase the availability of lower sodium items on the menu. So we decided to do that by 15% over 3 years. And we evaluated that by actually counting the menu items that were there, and then how many menu items were impacted by sodium reduction strategies. With the seniors, on the other hand, our goal was a 30% decrease in the sodium in the meals over 3 years, which was about 10% a year. And our evaluation was similar to what they would do in the schools, and that's using nutritional analysis and analyzing the sodium in every item that went out on the menu.
And so how did you begin the process of recruiting vendors, people to work with you? Julie's working in the schools and kind of has a captive audience, if you will. But how did you start the process of recruiting venues?
Well, Senior Meals was fairly easy because Schenectady County owns and runs a nursing home. And that nursing home produces the majority of the home delivered meals and congregate meals in the county. Okay. So that was a natural connection to make. And we also, as the health department, had a connection with the Schenectady County nursing home. Restaurants were a little different and took a little more targeted approach. We realized early on we can't work with chain restaurants because the changes that have to occur in chain restaurants are corporate changes. But we could work locally. So we began to look at the local restaurants in our community. And we also realized that we needed somebody on the inside because we didn't know the food industry and we didn't know how things worked in the restaurant business. Well, we were fortunate enough that one of the first restaurants we brought on was Tops American Grill. And Evan Christou, who is the owner and operator of that establishment, and he is also the founder and president of the Restaurant Operators Cooperative, which is a buying group in the area, was willing to come on as a restaurant consultant. And we needed him to be a liaison between the restaurants and ourselves because there was a lot of fear out there.
Sure.
There's that fear of change and losing customer base in a very tight economy. So restaurant owners were not it took a little convincing. So it was very helpful to have him allay those fears. We also didn't know the food industry, and it's a very complicated industry. So he educated us, and he also was a good liaison between the food distributors and the vendors and the brokers.
So really having Evan was kind of essential to recruiting restaurants to participate.
Yeah, and at least putting their fears at bay, I think, was one of the best things. So I'd like to talk a little more about our work with the restaurants and then move on to the strategies that they both had in common.
Sure.
For sodium reduction.
Sure. So what were some of the first steps you took in working with restaurants?
Well, the good thing is we have a very good partnership with our environmental health department. And our environmental health director was key in our recruitment of restaurants. Restaurants are familiar with dealing with environmental health for permits and inspections, and there's lots of dialogue between them. So our environmental health director was excellent in identifying the appropriate restaurants where seniors frequent, and also restaurant owners who would be agreeable to work with the project. And he went and he would make an introductory call for us and often explain a little bit about the project. And what he did in the beginning, which was very helpful, is he actually went on a visit with us. And this was a comfort level for both the restaurant owner and for our staff.
Sure.
And as we became more comfortable with the restaurant operations and the business, and as restaurant owners were less threatened by this project, we didn't need him to come with us anymore, but it was really helpful in the beginning.
So what were some of the first steps you took with the restaurants, either identifying restaurants or kind of getting in the door?
When we first started with restaurants, in our first year we worked with 5 restaurants. And our challenge was to develop strategies that worked in a restaurant environment, and then also a uniform way of evaluating what was going on with these strategies in the restaurant. So in working with these initial restaurants, we jointly developed strategies together. And what we found is that we wanted to make broad changes across the menu, not just affect one meal here and one meal there. So we decided to look at the key constituent ingredients that went into multiple menu items. So on that premise, we figured if we could reduce that, we could reduce a large number of menu items. And those are things we were looking at were like sauces and soups and gravies, tomato products, and main ingredients that went into menu items. We also discovered in the beginning that restaurant owners are extremely busy people. We had to maximize our time with them. So our information needed to be brief, concise, well organized. The other thing is we brought them written materials. We thought that were very good and gave it to them, and they didn't really have time to read through and figure out what strategies to use. So we really needed an interactive process with the restaurant owners. So what we ended up doing was developing a tool that we could come in and assess what the restaurant was doing, and then educate them on sodium reduction strategies, and then help them develop a plan with that. And that had to occur all in less than an hour.
Which I would imagine is no small feat.
No, but that's the time they gave us, and that's the time we had.
Sure.
So it worked quite well.
So in listening to this process, it certainly seems like it's evolved and it's been a work in progress. And so one of the restaurant owners that Schenectady County was fortunate enough to work with met with us to discuss his experience working to provide healthier, lower sodium options in his family-owned restaurant. So let's hear about Evan's experience.
This restaurant has been in my family for almost over 60 years. And we're in the business of accommodating customers' needs. And as people become more health conscious, we've always tried to stay on the forefront of what those needs may be. We were one of the first restaurants in the capital region to go zero trans fat with our frying shortenings long before it became legislation. And I just felt this was something worth looking into and finding out how we can reduce sodium in some of our dishes without reducing flavor. But after getting involved with the sodium reduction, we did find that we could make some very slight, simple changes without affecting the flavor profile of some of our signature items. For example, with our tomato sauce, it calls for 2 pounds of butter per 10 gallons. So we just very simply went from salted butter to unsalted butter. Well, I would say one of the main obstacles we face as we try to fine-tune our menus to be more sodium savvy is the fact that our suppliers are still not fully stocked with some of the ingredients and some of the items we may need. And again, that will progress with time, education, and demand, as did for things, for example, gluten-free. And by changing some of these ingredients, it impacts many items. For example, the tomato sauce, by using a high-quality tomato, by using unsalted butter versus a salted butter, by not adding any additional salt to the recipe, and still, adding, the vegetables and everything else that goes into it, and the spices and the seasonings that give it a nice flavor without the sodium, it impacts 7 or 8 items. It impacts the pasta dishes that use the tomato sauce as a base. It impacts the Parmesan dishes because we're topping them. The same with the gravies. If the turkey gravy has less sodium or the beef gravy has less sodium, it impacts 6 or 7 items on the menu. We're in the accommodation business, so we will accommodate the customer's needs. As the medical community and the younger, and as we educate children on more health conscious choices, our job becomes a lot easier.
So we really enjoyed having the opportunity to talk to Evan, and I bet your county is really fortunate and grateful to have had him as a liaison.
Yeah. Evan has been a wonderful resource for us.
I believe it, just from the little bit that we were able to interact with him. So now, in working with Evan and other restaurant owners or folks that work in the restaurant industry, what were some of the strategies that you adopted to try to begin making things happen and making changes?
Well, we found that the strategies really fell into three major categories, and that is what's on the menu, and what are they serving participants at meal sites. And the next one was cooking techniques, how they made the food, and then what products they purchase. We organize these strategies for restaurants on the tool. We actually put them in categories. So we would go through what's on your menu, to what extent do you do the following, and then we would organize the cooking techniques and then the products on that. So that's how we so we would explore that with them to see what they were doing, what were the potential strategies that they would try, and then what types of things would they do in those different categories. In subsequent visits, we actually used the tool again to measure change over time. In our work with the senior meal program differed just a little bit. The strategies were the same, the categories were the same, and also very similar to what was being done in the schools. But we, our different approach was that we worked with a fixed rotating menu similar to the schools, and that we worked with one food service manager, and then also that we used the nutrition analysis to measure their progress.
So let's take a look at each one of those different strategies in a bit more detail. Can you start by talking about the menu options and what's actually on the menu?
Okay. Well, one of our first strategies is always serve dressing on the side. And not that that directly reduces sodium, but it does give the consumer the choice. And we recommended like a 2-ounce serving, a 2 tablespoon serving, because as we spoke earlier, condiments, salad dressings are very high in sodium. And then the next strategy was similar to the schools again, offering a variety of fresh fruits and vegetables as side dishes, as opposed to potato chips and French fries and salads that are high in sodium. And then the next strategy was really to reduce the amount of cheese and bacon that came automatically on an entree, because that also increases the sodium in a meal. So again, that's a consumer option, so not to automatically put the cheese on the sandwich. And then the last was smaller, offering smaller portions. For the senior meal program, this was pretty fixed, but for restaurants, they did it in a variety of ways. Some restaurants said, well, we'll offer to adults child size menu sizes. That would be fine, or they'd allow a senior to split a meal, or they'd have senior specials with a smaller entree. So they did that in a variety of different ways.
And I mean, some of those sound like really smart ideas, because it's still, people still have the option if they want to add cheese, if they want to ask for more dressing, but it introduces almost like a consciousness, like you become aware that you're choosing to put these saltier products, to consume saltier products.
And as you heard from Evan, he says they're in the accommodation business. And when restaurant owners, if you ask restaurant owners to do something, they really want to accommodate their guests. So if people start asking for that, they will do that. And actually with dressing on the side, that's something that consumers had already begun doing and asking them a lot.
So what about cooking techniques? You mentioned that was another strategy category. What sorts of things did you address there?
Well, first and foremost is cook from scratch, and that's pretty obvious. If you cook from scratch, that the sodium's going to be lower. This was something that private restaurant owners are doing every day. They do this very well. They use a lot of raw ingredients and the freshest products that they can afford. For a senior meal program, this was a greater challenge, and that's because of the amount of meals they have to put out in a very short period of time. So they relied on a lot of convenience foods and prepackaged things to offset that time piece. So that was a bigger challenge for them. The next strategy was to measure salt or soup base. Now, this doesn't directly reduce the sodium, but it increases the awareness. And I think we were pretty surprised that most people didn't know how much salt they were putting into a meal. So we encouraged them, okay, just measure it, see what you're doing, and then consciously take some sodium out. So that was the beginning of the process of reducing the sodium, and this goes for soup base too. In 1 teaspoon of salt, there's 2,300 milligrams, and in soup base, it's anywhere from 800 to 1,000 and sometimes more per teaspoon. So that's a lot of sodium they're adding. So that leads us to the next strategy, and that is to reduce the amount of salt directly in a recipe or soup base in a recipe. And soup bases are used for lots of things: sauces, gravies, meatloaf, meatballs, all kinds of things. So to get them to consciously, they measured it, now take a tablespoon out, now take a teaspoon out, was a strategy. And then came the next strategy, which was similar to what you used in the schools, is a gradual reduction by combining regular products with lower sodium products. So it's not so big a shock to the consumer at first. So 25-75, that type of thing. So that worked well with soup bases, and it worked well with tomato products, sauces, things that they were making. That worked well with the senior meal program also, because they were able to reduce their gravies and by using 50-50 or 50-25 on soup bases. And the last one was to prepare vegetables without butter products, because butter products will add about 100 milligrams of sodium to the dish. And also that's a fat strategy too. So it's a good strategy to make it a little healthier with the vegetables.
And what about the last strategy, looking at the actual products that are used? What sorts of things did you consider there?
As you've heard all throughout this program, products, this is the most challenging category, and it's all because of supply and demand, and many of the barriers are the same barriers that you experienced. So first and foremost, with products, if you can buy fresh, raw, local, all of those things, it helps lower the sodium. Again, our restaurants were very successful in this area because they buy a lot of raw products. They use everything, so they really are doing that scratch cooking. But for the senior meal program, this was a challenge to buy fresh, and so they used a lot more pre-prepared products. So that kind of leads us to the next piece, and that's to ask. No, there are not a lot of low sodium products available out there yet, but if no one asks, they won't know. And we had the opportunity to talk to our 3 major food distributors in the area and many food representatives who would come to the various restaurants and ask them, well, how do we do this? How do we work on this? And they said, well, first and foremost, they've got to ask us, because if they don't ask us, we won't bring it. If they ask us for lower sodium products, yes, we can source them and find them. And what we found too is restaurant owners, and the same thing with the senior and congregate meals, they will bring you samples to try and taste test and work in a recipe with. So doing the asking is probably one of the most important parts right now where we are with sodium reduction. And that brings us to our final strategy, and that was to use the National Sodium Reduction Initiative targets. We wanted to facilitate the conversation between food distributors and also facilitate the conversation between the food representatives that visited restaurants and food services. So by providing them with targets of what they should be looking for, it helped facilitate the conversation. And what we did with these targets is that we made sure it was in language that they used, such as 4-ounce servings, 2 slices, that type of thing. So it made it easier for them to have that conversation with their food vendors. One thing we also found too is that sometimes lower sodium products, they're not labeled as such. So if you're looking at, one example was turkey. Pre-roasted turkey tends to be very high in sodium. So a restaurant owner was using a product that was over 700 milligrams for 4-ounce serving, but there was another product out there at a little more cost, but it was 200 milligrams less. It wasn't it wasn't labeled low sodium, but it was available. And the only way to find that out was to talk to the food representative, say, I'm looking for a turkey that is, so under this amount of milligrams a serving. And so
working with both the restaurants and the senior meal programs, did you find that similar strategies worked?
We found that the strategies were basically the same across the board. The one thing that we did find is that restaurant owners were much more successful in menu and cooking strategies. This is something that they found easy to adopt. They often didn't incur any cost to them, and they were things that they were doing to accommodate the customers, so they're very well incorporated into their restaurant operations. As for products, not so much. They found that a big challenge to make those changes. Now, the senior meal program, on the other hand, menu was pretty much set and changing things on the menu. They didn't do as well in cooking techniques, but they certainly did well in the product category. This is a place where they had a great success, because most of the sodium reduction changes we found in the senior menu had to do with product substitution. changing out a product. So the senior meal program, to give you an example, they went to lower sodium diced tomatoes, lower sodium deli meats in a lot of cases, a reduced sodium ham, soup bases. Those were some of the changes that they made. Food services also are at an advantage because they buy a lot of food, just like the school districts do. They buy a lot of food. So they have a lot more buying power when it comes to, okay, I'd like that lower sodium ham on my menu. And so they're able to purchase it. Yes, it is an increased cost, but the availability is there. The food distributor is able to get it for them. On the other hand, with the restaurants who are going for the same thing, a lower sodium ham, they're still trying. We're into our third year. They're still trying to get their distributor to carry that item. And the problem with that is that they need to guarantee 5 cases a week. And that's hard when you're one individual restaurant owner, and how do you collaborate with your buying group? And that's where the Restaurant Operators Cooperative, the buying group, that's some of the work that they're trying to do as well. How do we do this? How do we work together for this? So as you can see, there are big challenges out there. Changes can be made on the local level, but there's a lot of change that needs to be made on the national level
and
for all of us.
And it seems like you're doing a lot of really great work, even with the hurdles that you're facing. So if folks have questions or would like more information, and we've got quite a few questions that I'd like to try to get through, but is it okay if folks contact you?
They're welcome to email me. I know the address is on the screen, or call me at Schenectady County Public Health Services. We've provided a lot of technical support throughout the country as we learn lessons. We share our lessons learned.
Excellent.
And how we went about things, yes.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So let me ask you guys a few of the questions that we've got from the audience. The first is, are there any raw produce that mimic the chemical structure of salt and can be used as a salt substitute?
That's a very interesting question.
I think that's one for you, Julie.
I have not seen anything out there like that. I would probably have to do a little bit more research on that, but I have not seen anything like that that mimics salt.
The flavor.
Yeah.
Okay.
Interesting. I'll just mention, there are some products out there that are some spices and stuff that you can add to things that don't have any salt in them.
Like Mrs. Dash?
Yeah, Mrs. Dash is one of them. But I'm sure there's some other brands out there as well. Yeah.
Okay. What about how did you assess the acceptability of the lower sodium products in the senior meals?
Well, in our first year, what we did is our senior meal program is actually administered by the Catholic Charities organization. So we were able to send out a survey in the first year about the acceptability of foods. And how we did this is we had a very brief survey. This was to the home delivered meal participants. So it needed to be simple. So we basically asked, was the food flavorful? And then we targeted the menu items on that, the things that we changed. We had a low sodium ham, hot dog, various things. So was it flavorful, and how much of it did you consume? And I think that was just a question. We were curious how much they did eat of the meals that were supplied. So we found in the first year that there was really no, they felt it was flavorful, they felt it was acceptable, but we didn't tell them that we were reducing the salt either. But we just asked them those questions right out.
Well, good to hear that, you know, I think that's what Marissa had said earlier, the stealth health, don't tell them. So.
And the restaurants are the same. They don't advertise either, so.
Well, thank you guys both so much for being here today. I think we've covered a lot of really interesting information, and thank you very much for joining us today. Please remember to fill out your evaluations online. Your feedback is always helpful to the development of our programs, and continuing education credits are available. To obtain nurse continuing education hours, CME and CHES credits, learners must visit www.phlive.org and complete an evaluation and the post-test for today's offering. Additional information on upcoming broadcasts and relevant public health topics can also be found on our Facebook page. Don't forget to like us on Facebook to stay up to date. As a reminder, you can also download the companion guide to this broadcast on our website, phlive.org. The companion guide will provide you with learning activities to help further your knowledge and understanding of the topics covered in today's program. This webcast will be available on demand on our website within 2 weeks. Please join us for our next broadcast, which is next Thursday, March 28th, Prevention Agenda 2013, a blueprint for community action to improve health in New York State. I'm Rachel Breidster. Thanks for joining us on Public Health Live.